So next up is Natalie Tennant, who is the Secretary of State of West Virginia. Natalie's a wonderful Secretary of State. She's been there for 2 terms. Grew up on she's close to my heart because she grew up on a farm, as did I. She's a small business person, as was I. And one big difference is she went into communications and media, was in television, broadcast, and reporting before getting into the business of politics in the Secretary of State's office. She has been a leader nationally in doing things for military voters. And that means folks who are based not just in the United States, but overseas military and overseas voters. That has included a lot of technology innovations. And so we are pleased to have Natalie do a quick talk today about what she's done in West Virginia. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. You can stretch a little bit. What Robin failed to tell you was that as a farm girl, I was the youngest of 7. So I'm used to all kind of people being up and around and talking and having to be very loud, especially when the youngest of 7, and making sure they are listening to you. So I am so honored to get to be here and be part of this presentation. This is so important as we continue to move forward. I'm giving a little presentation about what we do, but I'm learning at the same time. And you might see some of the things, the thoughts and aspects that you're presenting used in West Virginia also. And I am talking about something that is very important to me and very important especially to the staff of the Secretary of State's office in West Virginia. And that is making sure that the men and women who are serving overseas defending our right to vote have easy access to the ballot themselves. And I'm proud to say that our work has been recognized by many organizations that you're familiar with. One, a Military Voter Protection Project. Saw David Becker here. The recent Pew data that came out showed the strides and the efforts that we are making toward military voting in West Virginia. I just think it's so important because we can truly make a difference for our military stationed halfway around the world during election time. These are the overseas citizens who are also over there, whose work takes them out of the country during election time. And so by using secure and reliable technology, we have been able to give citizens and our deployed military some normalcy and provide them that link back to their hometown in a very unique way. You know, they may get packages, they may get phone calls, they may get emails from their family members, but think about this. We are giving them some normalcy in a unique way. And for me, it is especially important, the daughter of a Korean War veteran and the wife of a United States Navy reservist who was serving a deployment in Afghanistan during a special election for governor in West Virginia back in 2011. I also want to mention that West Virginia has one of the highest military participation rates per capita in the country. So you can see why West Virginians are so proud and why I take this on as a personal effort and a personal responsibility as Secretary of State. And you know that West Virginia, as a UOCAVA voter, a voter covered under the Uniform Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. That's what UOCAVA stands for, and you're going to hear a lot of these election officials and experts talk about UOCAVA a lot. In West Virginia, we have many options on how to receive and cast your ballot. And before I get into that, I'll tell you about some of the partners that we have who have made this so successful to allow for the availability. Our online ballot delivery system is funded through an Electronic Absentee Systems for Elections EASE grant, which is provided by Federal Voting Assistance, and that's known as FVAP. In working with FVAP on the EASE grant, we have very closely also share the information such as deadlines, election dates, and voter information and make sure that it's current. We also work with them to get our voters connected to the voting assistance officers when they are deployed. So it's a great relationship that we have, a good back and forth and sharing of information. Now, our UOCAVA voters in West Virginia they can ask to have their ballot sent to them through the regular mail, fax to them, email to them, or they can receive access to a website to receive a blank ballot. Now let me see how we move to the next one. I have no idea what this thing, you know, me who loves technology might have wanted to learn about this, right? All right, so there you go. Once the voter receives the ballot, they have several options. They can have it emailed to them, mailed or faxed. They can mark it and then send it back, either mail or via fax machine. They can also scan it and then email it back to their county clerk. If the voter had the ballot delivered via the website, which is also known as online ballot delivery, they can mark the ballot electronically, but they then have to print it out. They can mail it back, fax it back, or scan it back, or email it back. So those are some of the options. There is no online return voting in West Virginia, not right now. And I will tell you about that in a second, but we're first going to look at some of the UOCAVA voting numbers for West Virginia from the 2012 general election. There were 1,091 UOCAVA ballots sent through the mail, 5 were faxed, 806 were emailed. So that's about a total of 1,902. The total UOCAVA ballots cast in the general election that came back were 1,672. That means about an 88% of all of our UOCAVA ballots were returned voted. Only 14 UOCAVA ballots were rejected during canvassing. Another 5 were received too late to be counted in West Virginia. So those are some really good numbers when you look at that percentage. Now, West Virginia is only required to monitor how the UOCAVA ballot was requested, not how it came back and was returned to the county, because remember, I told you have so many different options to be able to do that. So obviously the methods that West Virginia uses to deliver ballots to UOCAVA voters is working. And in 2010, I'll tell you about a special pilot project that we had to allow our UOCAVA voters to vote using a secure internet connection. And in order for us to be able to do this, we had to have legislative action that actually was unanimous from both our House and our Senate. And we had that legislation that was passed for a pilot program that sunset, and it was only to apply to the 2010 elections. So during the 2010 election primary, we had 5 counties that chose. They could do this themselves. They chose to take part in this pilot project. You can see by the graph of the return rates that the counties that participated, what they did, those ballots were sent electronically and voted electronically, and there was a return rate of 82%, much higher than the other methods. Now, we also had 3 counties come on board in the 2010 general election using 2 vendors, the Seidel and Everyone Counts. And because the primary election was so popular, though, the legislature expanded it. While there was still the sunset put in place, the legislature expanded the use to allow other counties to come on board, and other counties did that for the general election. So you can see from this graph how many online pilot absentee applicants there were and how many of them voted through the program. If you look even closer, you can see that Monongalia and Monroe County had 100% of their applicants cast the ballots. Now, granted, and we take everything, as it is presented. This is a small sample, but you cannot deny the positive numbers of people who use it when they know that it's available. That's the key right there. Our online voting system for UOCAVA voters used a 2048-bit encryption, a secure socket-level access to the application, which is a method for securing communications between a client and a server. And it was developed to serve the West Virginia specific requirements that we had in the piece of legislation. This encryption was also described as military style, and it worked well for us. So, what did we learn from it? From our pilot project, we learned that online voting is very popular when people know it is available and when people are assured of its security. You heard about that mentioned here in our first presentation. And as I said, we had a great return rate, no known breaches on our ballot security or of the system in general. And remember, we had many people looking at this very closely, and there were no problems reported. And in our questionnaires to those voters who used it, people used it, said it was very easy to use and loved knowing that their ballot had been returned and received by their county clerk. And many states looked very closely at West Virginia during this 2010 pilot project and how we did this program. West Virginia led the way on this, but now the legislation, as I said, is sunset. No longer do we offer pure online internet voting like we once did. I'll tell you, at the same time that we were doing this pilot project, we were also doing the pilot project for online ballot delivery, which is what we use now, which is what many other states use now too. It's just always been extremely important for me to be using and making voting as easy as possible for those men and women who are overseas. And I felt that it was important that West Virginia really lead the way on that because of that high percentage of participation rate that we have throughout the county. So I'm proud that this pilot project was successful. I'm happy that we were able to help hundreds of UOCAVA voters to be able to cast their ballots quickly, easily, and securely from around the world. I'm also proud that we started the discussion and debate that took place around this. Good, bad, all the way around, and you'll see that I certainly appreciate constructive criticism too, don't we all? And we received some of that as well, but that's okay. I mean, we are starting the discussion here. I want you to know that our dedication to military voters continues whether they're halfway around the world or whether they're back right here in West Virginia, because like many of you in 2012, many on the East Coast especially, West Virginia was slammed by more than a foot of snow when Hurricane Sandy hit. And if you'll remember, it was about October the 29th, remember that, when it hit with Election Day on November 6th. We were in the middle of early voting then. So that meant that some polling places in our most mountainous counties were without power and were simply without accessibility. How were people going to be able to get to the polling places? So the Secretary of State's office worked very closely with the National Guard, utility companies, public works divisions, local law enforcement, and yes, our local election officials to make sure that the election process continued, that it was that normal accessibility that we would have. But there were so many West Virginia National Guard members deployed in-state that we made provisions to make sure that they had the opportunity to vote because they were considered military, and we were able to use some of these same concerns, some of these same abilities of a UOCAVA voter here in West Virginia. We asked them to contact the nearest county clerk's office because they weren't in their same county, but contact the nearest county clerk's office or the one that, of the county in which they were working, complete the absentee application. That county clerk then sent it to the appropriate county for approval, put it in the statewide voter registration system, and then the voter was uploaded to the ballot safe system or the online ballot delivery system that we had in place. Then they could have their ballot emailed to them if they requested with that. And with the assistance of that clerk in that county where they were deployed, the ballot could also be emailed back to the home county. So it was a process that ensured that our National Guard members who thought they were going to be at home voting were still able to cast a ballot. So, you know, with all of this technology, there's sometimes when you have to go back to the basics. Now, this picture, I love this picture. This means so much to me because this is a DRASH tent. Anyone know what DRASH stands for? No military folks here? Deployable Rapid Assembly Shelter. The National Guard was able to set up these tents, provide heat and electricity, and then maintain this as a place for our polling. We had about 5 to 8 of these all around the eastern part of West Virginia when we were hit with snow because we used that as a polling place. Now, who would think that we would get back to voting in a tent like this? But the reason that this image is so important to me because it encapsulates everything that we are doing with voting. It starts with communication, the communication that we've had since I became Secretary of State back in 2009 with our military members, the cooperation that we've had year after year in trying to get more people and more military members out to vote, the technology that we used. You know, we tried the pilot project of the online internet voting, and we have online ballot delivery. Had we not pushed that through, it wouldn't have meant anything. We wouldn't have been able to have those National Guard members who were called to duty in their own state be able to vote. So that's why that picture is just so important to me because it shows this is what we will do to make sure that the election process continues, whether it's around the world or whether it's in West Virginia. So I just love that picture. You know, in the Secretary of State's office, that picture, and because of what else we do day in and day out for military voters, we have a special section on our website that contains information for UOCAVA voters, links them to the federal postcard application, an absentee ballot application for IOP voters, a mail-in form, a federal write-in absentee blank and link. It also links them to that information to be able to find out if their absentee ballot has gotten back to their county clerk's office and has been counted, and all those important deadlines. So, for West Virginia, we are dedicated to making sure that the men and women who are overseas and fighting for our right to vote have that easy access themselves. It is very simple of why we push it through, because we care. And when you care, you are good at it. And the military has been good to us, obviously, when you look at that picture. And in turn, we want to make sure that we have accessibility. So thank you all for giving me a little bit of time to share with you what West Virginia does and why it is so important to us. Hope you all have a good conference. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, that was great. Thanks so much, Natalie. Next up is a panel that's going to be wonderful on voting technology. We are blessed to be able to have some of the leaders around the country with us today that are thinking about what's next. We heard earlier this morning about the short life that we have of the voting technology that we're now using. We have a lot of innovative thinkers in different parts of the country that are going to be sharing this with us. You have one more chair to bring up? Come on. In the meantime, let me do some quick introductions. We have with us Dana DeBevoise from Travis County, Texas. She's an elected county clerk there and has been there for 28 years. She has been a wonderful leader in not just technology, but how to make the voting process more friendly for regular voters. She is taking the lead about trying to come up with a new voting system, and I just learned this morning has jumped out of an airplane more than 100 times. And so if she's able to do that, I think she can help fix the voting system. So thank you for being with us. We have Dean Logan here from LA County. It is the largest, most complicated voting jurisdiction in the country. They have over 4 million registered voters and 500 political districts, and I don't know how many languages that they have to provide ballots in. So Dean is also on the front edge of thinking about what new voting systems are going to look like for his county, and I'm convinced will set the standard for what happens in the rest of the country. Matt Masterson is here from Ohio. He is the Deputy Secretary of State and the CIO for Ohio, and in that capacity runs all of their IT operations and has been very involved overseeing their voting system development and certification in Ohio. Thanks for being here, Matt. Brian Newby is here from my neighboring state of Kansas in Johnson County, just across the border, and he's the guy that always made Missouri look the worst, because Kansas in Johnson County, in his area, was always doing the most innovative things in technologies. For the last 9 or 10 years, while I was trying to get things moving in Missouri, I always looked at Johnson County and said, if they can do it, we can do it. So all of you, thank you for being here. Our host is Pam Fessler from NPR, a familiar name and someone who's been covering technology issues for, I think, since 2000 in voting issues, and so a very knowledgeable source that will get to the bottom of all of these important issues. So please, come on up.
Okay, is the mic working? Yes, you can hear it. I sound so old. It sounds so old when you say I've been covering this stuff since 2000. But I think one of the, which is I think why one of the observations in the Presidential Commission that struck me so much was this warning that the equipment that everybody was so focused on in 2000 and the years afterwards, in which billions of dollars were spent and all these many hours of debate and anguish to re-equip most jurisdictions in the country, that a lot of it is now facing the end of its natural lifespan. And that not only do jurisdictions now not have enough money to buy new equipment, but nobody really knows what the next best step is, and that what's on the market is not really what people need or want. And that the whole system for certifying new equipment is in a state of disarray. And I think we're going to start first with Matt, who has promised that he is going to make voting system testing and certification really exciting.
No problem.
So I'm very tempted to see what he has to say about that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, first of all, what is the state of play and what are the problems we're facing right now?
Sure, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to speak on this. I'll be honest, usually when you get to voting system certification and testing, we're either right after lunch or like at the very end of the day when everyone can leave beforehand. So this is kind of fun to have it in the morning and get to talk about this. I just want to give some brief background on sort of where things are to honestly help tee up the discussion that you'll hear from these three innovative local election officials. It's fun for me to sit on a panel as the lone state representative with three locals so that they can talk about where the real innovation's happening at the local level with what they're doing. So currently, the voting systems used are the ones that were purchased right after the Help America Vote Act. And so you're looking at systems that are between a decade, 13, 14 years old, which all of you can attest to is a lifetime or two or three in the IT world. The reality is these voting systems, as we look at them now, are at the end of their life. They've held up well, and I think that needs to go recognized as well. Those jurisdictions which have maintained their systems and kept them operational, they've performed well, but it's a lot to ask for another 4, 5, 6 years of performance. And so folks like Dean, Dana, and Brian are looking for their next system. And the reality is that the choices and selections that they want aren't available to them currently. And there's a variety of reasons that we'll get into today why that is. But one of the main reasons cited and why the Commission, I think, discussed this at length is the sort of troubled position of the voting system testing and certification program federally. The Election Assistance Commission is the federal agency tasked with the testing and certification of voting systems. It's a voluntary program that both the manufacturers of the systems and the jurisdictions can use however they see fit. And so some states like Ohio rely completely on the federal certification program. Any voting system used in the state of Ohio has to be federally certified, whereas other states don't use it at all. Florida, for instance, has their own testing program. Now, they rely on some portions of the standards, but they don't rely on the testing at all. And then there's everything in between with the states on the testing. As many of you are aware, the EAC has been without commissioners, or at least a quorum of commissioners, for several years now. And that's had a very real impact on the testing and certification of voting systems. But I want to, I guess, make clear first is that voting systems can and are still being tested and certified. Even without commissioners, the EAC is still able to test and certify voting systems. And so those systems, for instance, which are out in the field right now, and we can kind of get into a debate about how effectively or efficiently they're being tested, they are getting modifications, and those systems are being tested to ensure that they meet compliance. What the EAC can't do currently is put out a new set of standards to test those systems to. And so the reality is the voting systems that are out in the field now, or any new systems, are going to be tested to a set of standards that was released in 2005. Well, technology is just a little bit different than it was in 2005. And so the reality is jurisdictions, as they look to the next set of technology, are reluctant, or at the very least extremely concerned, to rely on a system that would test new and innovative technology to a standard that was developed in 2005. And to the EAC's credit, they've tried to create some flexibility in the process, find ways to test new and innovative systems, but the reality remains they have a set of standards that's stuck in 2005. So what does this mean for everybody? Well, it means state and local jurisdictions are frustrated. As has been discussed, to my great surprise and pleasure, throughout the course of this morning, not only voters, which I think all three of the other panelists will talk about, but election officials see new and innovative technology and are demanding it now. They expect it in their elections process. And part of that, and Secretary Tenet did a good job kind of teeing this up, part of that is because they get to taste and feel it in other areas of the elections process. Things like online registration, online ballot delivery, e-poll books and the development of e-poll books in the polling place. Election officials are getting their appetite whet for new and cool technology, and they look at their voting system and think, my God, I've got a Scantron machine sitting out there. You know, that's not new or innovative in any way. And so that's what's led to this kind of push, as well as the end of life. And the final point I'll make, we've talked, and the commission did a good job highlighting, of kind of this growing concern over the technology, that there's this major disaster that can ensue. And the caution I'd offer there is that these systems aren't just going to one day just stop working flat out. You're going to go into your warehouse, and all of a sudden, none of the voting systems in the United States of America work. But what is going to happen is performance degradation. The systems are not going to perform as well as they should, and it's going to require more maintenance, which means more money, and it's going to require better attention to things like logic and accuracy testing and pre-election testing of the systems in order to make sure the systems are right. The systems aren't just going to fail and quit on you in that way, in a massive way, but they've got to be maintained and they've got to be attended to in that way. And so that's, I think, an important thing to note. So that's, I hopefully teed it up. I don't know if it was exciting or interesting, but
it's very exciting. Now, both Dean and Dana have actually decided to take things into their own hands, and despite what's going on with the certification process, and trying to do something innovative in your own jurisdictions. So, Dean, actually, first, why don't you talk about what you're doing in LA, why you're doing it, and you know, what innovation are we going to actually see?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to highlight the work of the Presidential Commission. And we were extremely pleased in LA that the Commission highlighted this issue, because it's been a huge issue in LA County for quite some time. It's interesting to hear people talk about, and it was great, all the panels earlier teed up for this, but it's interesting to hear that people think Scantron is old equipment. In LA County, we're using a voting equipment that was first introduced to our voters in 1968, and for the most part, we're still using that voting system today. And that is because there has not been a voting system that has been developed and that would function in a jurisdiction the size and has the complexity of Los Angeles County. I think what I want to emphasize today is, you're right, we sort of got to the point we kept waiting for there to be an opportunity to replace and modernize our voting system. What was available on the market wasn't scalable to our jurisdiction, and we kept waiting for there to be further development, and it just didn't happen. So we finally decided about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, that we couldn't wait any longer. We were going to be at the end of the extended lifespan of our voting system, and if we didn't do something, we were going to find ourselves in a situation where we couldn't administer an election in LA County, which obviously we didn't want that to happen. So we also made a conscious choice at that time, though, to recognize that the development of voting systems in this country has really focused on the question of what should we use to count votes, what should we use to cast votes, and very little of that development and research had been focused on the who, when, where, and how of voting. And so we actually stepped back and said, we're gonna start by figuring out what is the ideal voting experience. What does the voter expect from the process? And you heard discussion at the earlier panel on that. And also to contemplate what the future voter is going to expect from a voting system. So if we're going to have a voting system that can expand and adjust and be flexible for another 40+ year cycle, we want to be sure that when we make that public investment, and we don't have $200 million in LA County, by the way, let me just clarify that. But when we do make that sizable investment of public money, we want to be sure it's a system that will resonate with our voters, that's relevant to our voters, and that will leave them feeling like the vote they cast was recorded as they intended it to, and that it had meaning. So we have spent the better part of the last 3 years gathering data, doing usability testing, human factor design elements around what will the experience be for the voter, not so much what will the experience be for our office as the election administrator, or for how the votes get counted and how they get reported. We believe that that's the what, and we believe that that part will come together once we know how voters want to vote, where they want to vote, and what to expect from that. So that's been the fun part of the project. The difficult part of the project, and it's very difficult, and we've heard some of this already this morning, is we're trying to design and develop a voting experience and a voting system in an environment where the standards for that equipment are not adopted yet. The regulatory body that tests and certifies that equipment is dysfunctional. And we also are trying to design a new voter experience in a regulatory environment that still contemplates, at least in my jurisdiction, that voters vote one day between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m., and they vote in a single location that is tied to their address in close proximity to their home. All good values and values that I don't think we should give up, but I think the voting experience of the future, as we've heard earlier today, is going to carry with it the expectations that there are other options, that people can adapt the voting experience to the way they do other business. So trying to design for that, get it approved, and also wait for the legislative process to catch up with that in terms of things like vote centers, early voting options, and that type of thing is a challenge. But we're making progress. We have a non-working prototype of a voting marking device that we think is revolutionary. It contemplates what you heard Bob Bauer talk about in his earlier comments today, the idea of being able to pre-mark your ballot and come prepared and have that ballot read, interpreted, and then print out your ballot and still have a tangible record for auditing purposes and recounts. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. There are just a lot of things that happen to fall into place all at the same time to make that work.
Any idea when this might come to pass?
Our goal is to roll out the system in the off-cycle year in 2017 and to be up and fully functional, at least with the initial components of the voting system in the 2018 federal election cycle.
And just real quickly, I mean, what was the main thing that you got? You said you did this whole survey on what voters want out of the experience. What was the thing that they really wanted?
I think what we heard mostly from voters is what we've talked about this morning already, is that voters want options. They don't want to be forced into a single mode of voting or a single date, time, and manner of voting. They're very flexible. They don't think everybody should have a individual customized experience, but they think there should be options for when, where, and how you vote. I think voters want it to be intuitive. They don't want. We spend a lot of time looking at how do you do instructions and how do you show people how to use the equipment. The reality, when you talk to voters, and if you spend any time in airports, I think you can realize this, is you can do great signs, you can do plain language instructions, you can do videos and all that. People don't pay attention to those things. They do what they think they know they're supposed to do, and they don't like asking for help. So yes, we have to have resources there. We have to have poll workers who can help them through the process, but voters don't want to have to ask for help. They want to come in and they want to know what to do, and they want it to be a fairly smooth and expedient process.
And Dana, so what are you doing in Travis County, and maybe how it compares with what they're doing in LA?
There's a lot of comparison.
Yay.
And good morning to everybody. I'm a graduate in from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. So for me, I'm basically living Lyndon's dream here. I'm entirely thrilled to be here. We started working in Travis County about 4 years ago with a citizens group to figure out what were really the things that our citizens, our voters wanted in a new voting system. And there were several things that they wanted. One of the things that we started off early on was that we wanted a system where everybody voted the same. So in jurisdictions who had usually difficulty with financing, they had a split system where some people voted optical scan and then they would have one accessible unit. And Travis County citizens decided that they did not want that kind of system, so we purchased a long time ago an all DRE, an all electronic voting system. Well, to graduate that into the future, what people decided that they wanted was they wanted something more trustworthy than just electronic. They wanted to be able to say, no, we can prove up the ballot from an all electronic voting system, so they wanted to add a paper element. The next voting system that we wanted to be something that had an auditable feature that the voter verified. So 4 years ago, we knew what our voters wanted, and we started looking on the marketplace for this, and it did not exist, especially in any kind of form that would offer easily retrievable access to the auditing tool so that it could be used for recount, so that it could be easily brought into the process for end-to-end verification. Now, I'm throwing around a lot of terms because 2.5 years ago, I was able to bring together a group of nationally known scientists and professors throughout the United States, and they have volunteered to come and help Travis County build an electronic voting system that offers end-to-end verification and voter verifiability. We have 2 versions now of what we call Star Vote. One of them offers a full ballot that is a subset of what the voters have chosen, and it prints out the ballot along with a receipt that allows the voter later on to go back to a bulletin board and verify the hash, doesn't reveal the voter's choices, verify the hash that says that the contents of the vote is the same as what actually got counted, okay? We're not talking about revealing the ballot, okay? I want to make sure, does everybody have that clear? I want to make sure I don't leave here with anybody thinking that. All right. The second part is that Philip Stark out of Berkeley, the chair of statistics, has a new method for doing recounts that use this paper element that the voter has verified in a way that's really quick and easy for the election administrator. So that is called risk limiting audits. And we wanted to make that a part of Star Vote too. So and that the whole thing is based on cryptography, which allows the voter to use math to safeguard their ballot. And I can go into it a lot more in detail because these incredible geniuses have taken the time to teach us a lot about how to safeguard DREs. And we would be in a different world today had we started off with the proper security for DRE systems. We would be talking in a different world. But that's not the world we have been given. And so we're going to have to go, I think, back in time a little bit and rebuild the confidence in electronic voting systems so that we can get the best of both worlds. Electronic voting systems allows us to have all of the future options that voters want. Like, for example, vote systems and early voting systems and even same-day registration and all of these features that fit their lives for the future. But we want to make sure that electronic voting is, and I hate to use the word hackable because it's such an imprecise term, but it's in our vernacular, and I think it's what voters understand. They just want to know that their vote is safe, that it's recountable, and that it has been captured as they intended it and then tallied as they cast it. What Star Vote offers to them is that kind of a system. What Star Vote stands for, STAR, secure, transparent, auditable, and reliable. And that's what we're trying to build right now, and I would like the opportunity to talk to you more about Star Vote, but we'll hand that off. And we're very close. We have a not ready for prime time prototype. Star Vote is very near the RFP process, and I'm hoping within the next few months to be able to issue the RFP. I feel, perhaps a little more acutely than Dean does, the pressure to get this product built. We are on this tight time frame, and I feel like for the benefit of all the other counties in Texas, the ones who have already said they want to do Star Vote, as well as where this thing might go to benefit other states, we've got to get this thing built as soon as possible. It's got to be right, and it has to be extremely low cost and on an open source model.
And so what year do you think you might have it in
What year? Well,
before 2017.
yes, sir. I do think it's going to be before 2017. I keep running into obstacles, and perhaps later on we can talk to you about the obstacles for Star Vote.
Actually, so Brian, could you talk a little bit about, obviously the big thing that everybody talks about is expense and the cost. So I'm curious how you think that plays into what other jurisdictions might be doing to deal with their technology issues that they're confronting, and then, as far as adopting maybe one of these more innovative processes, what might be holding up other jurisdictions from doing the same thing as LA and Travis County?
Right, and first I would say that as I looked through this program today, I was reminded of the guy who was kind of a poser. He would go and he'd sneak in and warm up with the San Diego Padres or the Houston Rockets when they were warming up, and I feel like that's what I am doing here today with all of you smart high achievers. So I can only think that I'm here for comic relief. And I guess listening to Dana, especially thinking of the pressure to come up with something, we feel that, and a little bit of a background with Johnson County, our voters moved from paper to selecting voting machines in 1968, which means if you're 57 or younger, you voted on voting machines in Johnson County. This is, we heard Nate earlier say $2 billion in terms of dollars needed. And this is going to be, when we replace, would be our fourth system since then. So I don't think it's $2 billion. I think it's $2 billion today. There'll be another time, again. And so what we're trying to do is take the kind of the learnings from what's going on in LA County and Travis County and accelerate that, and maybe even try and associate ourselves with what they're doing, which is a little bit like saying, Brian Newby and LeBron James combined for 32 points last night. So what we're trying to do is take that uncertainty within our county, because we had money set aside year to year for a new system, because our system was built and purchased actually before HAVA. So the system we have now went into place in 2001. We changed some machines with California. So everybody's talking about how you're going to run out of money because there's no HAVA dollars. Well, we didn't have HAVA dollars in the first place. So we're trying to be aware of that and what we would do. And so we had this money set aside, but during the budget cuts and times of 6, 7, 8, that time frame, that was taken out. And so because the view was there's so much uncertainty that we better not do anything. And so the uncertainty Dean's talking about has really hurt us in terms of being able to plan. And I look at that and I think, well, we don't have any money. And frankly, that's never stopped government before from spending. So we'll figure out a way somehow. And I went back to in 2001, they did a debt issuance. They bonded, and that's how they bought it. That may be what they do again in the future. But for us right now, it is indeed how we're going to pay for it. And that is a big deal. And as thrilled as I was that the election officials were represented on the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, I came to the conclusion that there was a major group missing, and that was NACO, or counties, people who funded. I would equate it to, the school let the students create and plan the after-prom party, but now we have to go to the parents and still pay for it and convince them to do it. And to me, that's the biggest thing. The booklet that you get when you come in, the report that we've all seen, no one outside of this room really believes that it's for them. This is for you guys to go figure out. No one realizes that the audience is outside this room. And to me, that is the biggest issue we face right now with funding is making it something that captivates the people who have the money to be able to pay for it.
Well, how would you do that? I mean, is it going to take another disaster where some equipment is breaking down in the wrong state at the wrong time that's going to be decisive, that's going to get people to actually pay attention to, what the commission has recommended?
Well, probably. I mean, that's what we're hoping. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Not Ohio.
Not in Ohio.
But I think it's aside from that, it's building coalitions, and it's trying to figure out ways to make what you're talking about seem more normal to others. So that if there's 6 of us or 8 of us or 10 of us who are talking about a particular solution, that eases the anxiety with the people who are going to control the funding. Then we move off you don't know what you're going to buy, and now it's more talking about the funding. But right now we've got to get off what are you going to buy so that we can then get to the funding.
But it's sorry.
Well, I just want to say on the issue of funding and timing, I think those obviously are fundamental issues here, but that's really the challenge here, because the history here is when we had funding, there was this rush to go out and buy all this equipment. And that equipment was not designed with voters in mind. And it was not ready for prime time. We know that today. I sit in a jurisdiction where 3 of the 4 counties that border me have the voting systems and the voting equipment that they purchased with HAVA money sitting in warehouses because it was decertified by the Secretary of State. They can't sell it. Nobody wants it. They're paying public money to store it in warehouses. I'm feeling the pressure to get a new voting system in LA County, but I never want to be in that situation. I want to be sure that whatever we have is going to be scalable and meets the needs of voters. And I think that's the opportunity, as uncomfortable as it is, feeling that pressure of time and not knowing. I mean, we don't know how much money, the question was asked earlier today, we don't know how much money it's going to cost in this country to replace voting equipment because there isn't voting equipment to buy right now that will meet the needs. And we need to spend some money on that process now, which is what we've determined to do in LA County. And that's been the hard part. We've had money because we have HAVA money left over because we didn't replace our voting system, but that money was locked down to purchase an existing voting system. So we have had to scrap together the funds to actually do the work that wasn't done after 2000. So
Right.
we have to learn from that mistake, and we have to resist the urge, from my perspective, to rush out there and do full-scale replacement, because we're talking about a different method of delivering services. And we have the opportunity now to leverage open source software for the interface. We have the ability to leverage off-the-shelf components rather than having a end-to-end voting system in the past. So I think Matt's point earlier that the voting systems that are out there, they're clunky, they're not ideal, they weren't designed great. We've used them. They can be used through the next election cycle or two successfully. They contribute to the issues that led to the Presidential Commission. But we got to be sure, if we're going to replace those systems, that we replace them with something that doesn't create a whole new set of issues, because that's what happened when we went from punch cards to electronic
Right.
voting.
So it's good you're talking about this now, so maybe 2 election cycles from now, you might be able to have something
Right.
in place before the equipment starts
Yeah,
falling
that
apart. And actually, just real quick, I mean, so isn't part of what you're looking at, to get more off-the-shelf stuff, so wouldn't that be less expensive? Isn't that the whole purpose of it? You're more flexible, less expensive? Or is that-
Ideally, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
At the very least, and we've talked a lot about this, it changes the paradigm. Right now, the biggest cost of voting systems, even more so than purchasing them, is maintaining them. And in theory, if you're buying off-the-shelf products that help you create that voting, you've eliminated the need to maintain them because you can just go out and get, whatever
Right.
you need to get. And in theory, it just changes the service and maintenance of voting systems is where the money is spent on voting systems. And this switches the entire business model when you start to look at purchasing commercial off-the-shelf products in that way. And it changes the way you look at them.
I've been asked to open up for questions, so.
While we're waiting.
And if you do have a question, could you go to the mic in the center, please? Yeah, and I'm sorry.
I was going to say, while we're talking about the kinds of things that we're looking for in voting systems for the future, we do have obstacles for these voting systems, and one of them is if we break the market so that counties are not so strapped by these multi-million-dollar purchases of new voting systems, and we don't rely on the vendor community to give us proprietary-owned, very expensive plastic boxes with their software that runs on them. If we break that model and do something completely different with some version of open source software and off-the-shelf hardware, then we also need to start asking ourselves, and this is part of the perhaps not totally an obstacle, but certainly a consideration for the future. Then what do we do with the marketplace that we have right now? We need to be cautious about making sure that these vendors can stay in the marketplace somehow, because we don't want to throw away all of that vast knowledge, historical architecture of voting systems in our haste to try to make sure that we get something better. In other words, let's not throw the baby out with the bath when we get new voting systems.
Hi, I'm curious, looking around the world, what international democracies kind of lead the way in voter technology?
Ooh.
That's a really interesting question, right? And I will try to stay off the third rail of election technology, which is internet voting. But there are countries out there trying that, right? Estonia most notably, but have had their struggles, right? And so as you look at how other democracies handle this voting technology question, it's one that they're struggling with also. One of the things that makes U.S. elections a bit unique, and those of us who talk to our Canadian friends, that they always remark about this, is the complexity of our system and our ballot. Our ballots are highly complicated. Highly, the way we run elections in that regard is highly complicated and technical. And so the challenges that our systems face with ballot layout, rotations, assignments, all of those things aren't as much of a struggle necessarily internationally, depending on the country. And so the technology we need is different in that way, but not unique. I mean, countries across the world, India, for instance, they have their own, but it's really simple, right? It's a really simple piece of tech because it has to be, and there are problems on both sides with that, but that's what they've chosen given their electorate, and that's how we have to look at it. I don't know if any.
South America has systems too.
Yeah, I'm also interested in, obviously, the issue of security is so paramount when it comes to voting technology. And of course, the first thing I was thinking, oh, you're getting all this, off-the-shelf systems and, putting it together. How do you ensure that voters can be confident that these systems are going to be safe? I mean, how big an obstacle is that?
Well,
I
think that has to be addressed in the standards, and the standards are in flux. And in California, we, again, by necessity, passed legislation to bifurcate ourselves from the federal standards
Right.
because we needed to move forward, and we actually adopted higher standards. But the other thing, from an operational standpoint, one of the things we're doing in our project, which I think goes to this, is where we want to leverage the off-the-shelf technology is in the vote marking process, the process of the voter making their selections. Our design still contemplates a paper-based ballot that's human readable, and it contemplates that the tabulation system that's going to count that paper ballot will be entirely separate from the system that marked that ballot, which is fundamentally a huge shift away from what we have today, because today we have end-to-end voting systems. We want flexibility on the side of how the voter marks their choices, selects and verifies their choices. We want them to be able to see that on the ballot, and then the ballot goes into a secured ballot location, gets counted on a tabulation system that's totally independent of that. But it goes back to what Dana talked about, the auditing ability, recounts. I mean, a lot of that comes down to transparency of process, the operational security that you put in place, and getting comfortable demonstrating that to the general public.
The only thing I'd add just real quickly that Dean and Dana have highlighted in their work is perhaps the biggest security risk to systems now are voters not being able to use them properly and therefore not being able to cast the vote the way they want, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's a real risk to the system that needs to be addressed.
Which was a design flaw.
Right, right.
And if I
And-
might add
sorry.
just one more thought to this, one of the things that we're also struggling with as an obstacle is which voluntary voting standards are you talking about? There's 2005 that Matt mentioned. There's also 2007 and there's 2012. So which standards are you talking about? Because if you're only going to focus on 2005, then you're really out of the loop on being able to build anything that's going to be secure for the future. And yet if you look at 2012, then you've got to be able to say, well, okay, is the 2012 standard missing something that you're going to have to cover in 2005? And that kind of gap analysis gets really complicated.
Getting back to the previous question and Matt's response, what does Canada use in their voting system?
But I think
Systems.
it's a good question. They use a piece of paper and a pencil, I believe.
In some
Really?
jurisdictions.
In some
I mean,
jurisdictions,
they use
right.
a variety of the same
Right,
systems
variety
we
of-
use.
Yes,
But
right.
it's a real simple ballot.
It's a mixture.
And what kinds of technology other than paper and pen or pencil do they use? Do they use any technology? Any internet voting? Any internet online registration?
Go ahead.
There are a lot of countries around the world that use either internet voting or DRE, all electronic voting. The one that was in the paper most recently was in the India election. That is an all DRE election that covers how many billion people? Is it 2 billion people? And I think it took them 5 weeks to do that election all through their country. So they've got their own setup working. Helios, that was built by Olivier, and I'm so sorry I've forgotten Olivier's last name. He's the Catholic University that's in Belgium. He designed that, and it is a special kind of system that is a combination of optical scan and DRE that everybody votes together. That's not that far off from some of the things we're doing for Star Vote. Let's see, Argentina and Venezuela and a lot of the South American countries use DRE only voting, and recently Argentina has had a problem with just DRE. The problem with DRE is as long as you have big margins and it comes out the way people expected, then the public trusts it. But the minute one thing goes wrong, then everybody says, well, how do I know? Where's the proof? How do I know that this is the way it really is? And with only DRE, you have no backup. You have no way to verify it.
Okay, so
that's
okay, so based on your response to my question, getting back to Matt's original point, only the United States has the complexity of our voting system that doesn't match any other country around the world.
I don't know about.
I would say I'm not enough of an expert to confirm that, but we certainly have a very complex system here.
But if,
Go ahead.
could I-
So
Yes,
Brian, I'm let Brian.
Yeah, if I agree with Matt on that, but I think this, not that you're not an expert, but
No, I agree with Matt on that.
but I think something Dean said earlier, and this is, I think this is something we all have, and then it plays up even in the first two questions. I don't want to be known as the person who spends money on something that's not the right solution. And I think that's our view, and I almost believe that hurts us because that makes us seem indecisive. And that's not really where we're going with it at all. And it's a common thought process to think, well, let's look at best practices. And there's something to be said for being the best practice. And that's really what I think these two communities want to be. That's what we want to be. And so in terms of that, to me, that's really where we have to start with. I think is what is the right thing to do. And everybody, I would say, is kind of an expert on voting. You know, that's what we run into as much as anything. Just like they're probably an expert in education because they've all gone to school, everybody votes. And so what we're finding is this uncertainty, I think, is really a big deal because in the end, we can't move from what the system is because there's a variety of opinions. And we kind of just need to figure out, having spent too much time in bars in college and listening to some pinball game or it's 8-ball deluxe saying stop talking and start chalking, I think that's really what we need to do. And the implementation concept here of this, election people are good at implementing things. And I think that's something that is a characteristic of elections, that it is a beloved capability, if you want to think of it in business, being able to execute as opposed to just plan. And I think for us, we just need to go forward and pick the system we think and be maybe more decisive in the way we're talking to others.
But it sounds pretty much like you have to wait and see how one of these, what I'd call them a pilot program, works first before you would adopt something, right? Because
well, we don't want to
there's so much risk involved in doing something incorrectly.
Well, only in that, and we've experienced it enough in Johnson County, you don't want to be the first to implement something.
Right.
And
let them fail first.
yeah, well, they won't fail, but I mean, but learn from that for sure.
Right. I'm sorry.
Yes, since we're really building an airplane here while it's flying. So I'm just curious in terms of the architectural principles that are guiding ongoing technology, process, and information management and integration. Could you speak to how that's being addressed within the RFP process and within the design process?
Since I'm closer to an RFP, perhaps I can start the answer. Well, let's see here. It is a all right, it is open source that will allow for some kind of version control, so not pure open source, but some kind of open source such that a group of counties would participate in the first structure. Where I am, 10 counties, the large counties in Texas, are deciding, nobody's signed any agreements yet, but the general consensus is there are 10 of us that are going to go in together to build StarVote. The 10 have already met and said we'd like to make an additional change to StarVote that we think would fit the elections administrator better, so having them into that process assures us that we're going to have something that does work once it gets built. We're in that process right now. So there's your funding. There is a group called the Conference of Urban Counties that does projects for counties under what's called a tech share model. So what we'd want is to have a group that we could then hand off the county ownership of the source code to, in terms of an agreement, to a group that could serve then as, if you will, kind of a Kennesaw state model, a place for it to sit, for it to be supported for the other counties, for it to have modifications added to it, something like that. The mathematics of it have to do with the cryptography being the way the ballot is protected. Encryption, and I'm a newbie at this, so the encryption is basically putting an envelope around the ballot, transferring it through the electronic process, putting it in a ballot box, and then having the paper part that the voter verifies themselves also put in the ballot box so that you can always match them up. Let's see, what else? We are going to, one part of StarVote will have risk limiting audits, but there's also going to be a shorter version that is only going to have a receipt part of it. So you'll be able to have, the voter will get their ballot, but it'll be in a 2D barcode kind of, so not human readable, but machine readable for counties that don't want that much paper in the polling place, because for elections administrators, it's very burdensome and expensive, and even voters sometimes don't want all that paper. But we've found ways to protect the paper by printing it out in certain directions so nobody could see it. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? Okay, ownership, version control, ongoing customization, ownership. That's probably a pretty good list there. Thank you.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to lay out the technical platform of our design. What I will say that I think addresses your question is that again, we're trying to take a different approach in our project. So we have a design now, and that design was based on human factor design model. So we know what it looks like and how it needs to function. We're now hiring a firm to write the specifications for that, which include the software specifications, the platform, the way to leverage off-the-shelf components, the interface and all that. And we're intentionally hiring a firm to do that will not compete to manufacture and build the system. So we want the specifications, the technical architecture of this system to be developed by someone who's not developing it with profit in mind. They're developing it as a product for LA County that will be publicly owned, and then we will then go out and do a competitive RFP to have it manufactured. So those kind of standards and that kind of technical infrastructure will be addressed in those specifications. That's the stage we're at now. We're doing that before we go to RFP because we want them to separate those two processes.
I did forget to mention we are red teaming the build. And that's something that the vendors had never done, red teaming the build. That helps make sure that you're in compliance with standards before you go to the certification process. And one of the other obstacles is, how are we going to deal with the certification process? And I don't know is the answer to that.
I've been told we're getting close to the end. I just real quickly, Brian and Matt, did you have anything else you want to add? I mean, are you hopeful that these issues are going to get addressed and that we'll all be very happily voting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I'm hopeful because election officials, quite honestly, because they don't have any other choice in their job, always find a way, right? Election day is election day. You don't get to move it, and they always find a way. This problem will be dealt with, and it'll be solved, but it's going to take innovative thinkers. It's going to take people like Brian raising the correct concerns about funding, and then the rest of the states and localities stepping up and figuring out exactly how to approach it. But we'll be in a good place.
Well, I'm convinced the money will be there. I'm convinced of that just because if you look historically, government continues to move forward. I mean, I just can't conceive of a way that we wouldn't have voting systems. I don't know how we're going to get that funding, but given that, I mean, for us then, it's just it's a matter of waiting for once the money's being spent, I guess, which is where it's going to come, I think we're going to see kind of a very fast movement of innovation. And look just with electronic poll books and how there's the number of vendors who provide those has really just kind of ballooned once money was there just for something like that. So I think we have vendors who are ready to begin selling and others who will be enticed by getting into the market once that money is there. And I think we're probably 3 or 4 years from that. And if we can sweat our assets, so to speak, and get along with that, until then, I think we're going to be better off than if we get something right away.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it was a great conversation. There's so much more to talk about. So I'm sure you'll be happy to answer anybody's questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.